friends, it's Shari, and today I'm making a fun spinner card using the new Virtual Friends add-on stamp set. So I thought it would be fun to make a spinner card with the little office chair in the Virtual Friends add-on. I'm also going to be using that little line of cactuses and plants from the Simply Celebrate Summer. I'm going to be cutting those apart just to supplement my little plant that comes in the Virtual Friends add-on set. I'm stamping all my images in jet black ink so that I can do some coloring with my Copic markers. And of course I need to stamp that chair twice, and I'm also stamping a second little mouse who's going to be peeking out for just a fun little detail. So for my mice, I'm going to be using warm grays. I'm going to do simple shading. So I color the bottom of the head and right under his chin, down at his feet, and the bottom parts of his arms. And then I'm going to come in with my lighter gray and just fill that in and blend it out. So I'm just going to have some slight shading in those shadowy parts. I'm going to color both mice exactly the same. I'm going to use the R11, which is a very pale pink for the inside of his ears. And then I'm actually going to put a little bit of that at the bottom of his belly, and then I'm going to blend it out with my E000 so that you get this just slight pink to cream tone on his belly. For that little bunting banner at the top, which is going to go at the top of my window, I'm just going to color these with no shading, just in a rainbow of colors. So I've got a pink, an orange, a yellow, and then I will do a green and a teal at the end. This is just going to add some more color to my card, and it's just a fun detail to finish off the top of the window. Now I'm going to color some of these plants. I'm not using all of the plants in that line of plants from the Simply Celebrate Summer. I'm going to use the two on the right side, and then I'm also going to end up using the one on the left. So I'm just coloring that with 2 shades of green, a little bit of pink for the flowers. I'm going to use that same pink and a lighter one to color the pot of the plant from the Virtual Friends set. I'm coloring this pot in purple, so I'm kind of trying to keep with a rainbow of colors for the pots as well. I plan on coloring the chair in a blue teal color, so I'll save that for the chair and color the pots differently. You can see I kind of waited. I haven't colored all my plants just yet, so I'll come back to those. For my chair, I'm starting out with my darkest teal, and I just outlined the back of the chair and just a little bit on the edges of the seat and the arms. And then I'm going to go in with this medium tone and just pull that color in from the outside. So I'm kind of looking at this like it's sort of curved like an office chair. And then I'm going to go in with my lightest color in the middle. Now, this actually wasn't the color I meant to grab. It's a little bit too light. You can see it's not really blending very well, so I'm going to actually put that away once I realize that's not working. And I'm going to grab a different one that's a little bit darker. You can see this one blends much better. That other one was just too far away from the tone that I was trying to blend out. I'm going to color both chairs the same, but you're going to see that I kind of colored the other one a little bit more dark, so it has a slight difference from the front and the back. I'm using some cool grays for the frame of the chair and the wheels, and I'm just doing some slight shading underneath where that support comes into the chair. And I decided I wanted those wheels just a little bit darker, so I've grabbed a darker shade of that cool gray, and I'm coloring in those wheels. Now back to the pots of my plants. So now that I've got my chair there and I know what color that's going to be, now I know what kind of colors I want for the rest of the pots of my plants. So I've done an orange with this one, I've got a purple, I've got a red, and then this one's going to be a blue color. I didn't want to color any of the pots green since all my plants are green. So I'm just using 2 or 3 tones on this one. I'm going to go in with an even darker one here just to kind of give it some shadow at the bottom, and then I'm going to use a blue. So I started with light on that one, and I'm just going to pull in some dark on the side for a little bit of shading to kind of show the shape of the pot. So now that I have everything colored, I can use the coordinating dies to cut out all my images. So you can see I've got that line of plants from the Simply Celebrate Summer, but for that particular one, I need to cut them apart because I just want to use these plants individually. So I'm going to put those two aside. I'm only using 3 of these, but this is a really fun way to kind of stretch this stamp and supplement that little plant in the Virtual Friends add-on. I just think these are sized perfectly to go with it, and you can make a whole office full of plants. Now to work on my spinner chair. So as you can see here, I have 2. They're going to go back to back. But the problem with this is that the little handle that you use to adjust the height of the chair is on one side. So when you put them together, they're not exactly symmetrical. So to fix this little problem, I'm simply just going to cut it off because we don't really need it. We're not going to miss it too terribly much. So I've put my 2 die cut pieces face to face, and then I can use the edge that the die created as a guide where to cut this little handle off. Perfect. And now I can flip it over and do the same thing on the other side. Now you could possibly line your die up again with the chair in there backwards, but you have to be really careful to make sure it's lined up perfectly. So this is just much easier to do. And so now when I put them back to back, they match perfectly. And I don't have that little handle sticking out anymore. I'm going to go ahead and add one of my little mice to the chair, to the front chair. And I have a piece of kraft cardstock cut with the largest outside in stitch rectangle. And then I'm using a smaller outside in stitch rectangle to create my window. Just using my T-square to make sure it's straight and looking at my grid mat to make sure it's straight in there. And this is going to cut a rectangle out of the center of this panel, but it's also going to leave a nice stitching detail around the outside because it is an outside in rectangle. I'm going to be using some perfectly plaid paper for the inside of my card because you're going to see this through the window that's on the front. And then my card base is cut from some peacock cardstock, and I've lined up that panel with the window on the front, traced it with my pencil, and then I'm actually using the next size up rectangle. So this is from one of just the stitch rectangle sets. And I'm lining that up with my pencil rectangle, and this way, this opening is going to be slightly larger than the opening in the kraft piece, and I don't have to worry about the fact that it might be slightly off because it's going to get hidden behind that kraft frame. So I've opened that up, I've run that through my die cut machine, and you can see I've got this window, and this is going to fit right over it, and I'll flip it open here and you'll see it doesn't matter if it lines up perfectly or not. So now to work on my spinner piece before I start to assemble my card. I'm going to use my grid mat as a guide to line things up. So I've put that grid line on my mat straight through the middle of my chair. I've got a piece of thread. This happens to be silver thread, but you could use whatever thread you have. I think I have some clear somewhere in my stash, but I wasn't sure. But the silver actually kind of disappears pretty well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that frame and I'm going to flip it over to where it is the right side down. Line up my chair in that frame. Again, I'm using my grid mat to make sure everything's nice and straight. And I'm going to put this piece of thread along the back of the chair. So I'm going to start by putting it on the frame, and what I decided to do was to put this string on there with both liquid glue and a piece of tape, and that way the tape will hold it in place, and once the liquid glue dries it'll be nice and sturdy in there and it's not going to slip out from underneath the tape. So I'm just going to get a piece of tape ready, and I'm going to take my liquid glue, my glue tube here, and I'm just putting a line, and you can see how it's lining up with that grid line. That is where my string is going to go. So I'm just lining up the bottom piece. I'm going to hold it in place and then put my tape right over the glue. And I'm also going to take my bone folder and burnish that in so it's nice and stuck down. Again, once that glue dries, it'll be nice and stuck down and I won't have to rely just on the tape. So it's not going to move. I don't want it to loosen up over time from spinning around. I'm going to pull this taut and do the same thing at the top where I've already put my little glue line. So I'm just getting a piece of tape here. Pull that up using that grid line as a guide again. Put that piece of tape down and then burnish it with my bone folder so it's really well stuck down. So now that my string is in place on the frame, I'm going to sandwich that string between my two desk chairs. So I'm lining it up again, lined up with that grid. I've put liquid glue all over the back of it. I'm just lining it up so it is on that string, and then I can take the other side of my chair and just sandwich that string right between those two pieces. And using that liquid glue lets me shift it around, get it lined up nicely, and then that is going to dry nice and sturdy with that string inside. And look how cute it is that he spins around. So I'm going to trim off the extra thread that comes out past my tape. And then I can add liquid glue all over to the inside of this frame. And I'm just going to line it up on my card base. And since I cut this with that outside in stitch rectangle, the large one, I'm going to have that nice little mat of that peacock around the outside of the craft. And you can see how it's not lined up perfectly. This is why I didn't need to worry about the lining up because I used a bigger rectangle for the card. So it's just a little tip to not make yourself crazy trying to get stuff lined up perfectly. I also cut this inside piece with that same outside in stitch rectangle so it has a little bit of a border around it as well. For my sentiment, I'm going to use the Bannertastic set. I'm going to use this one that's just straight across, and that Sending Smiles from the Virtual Friends add-on is going to fit right in there just perfectly. I do have to curve my sentiment slightly, but I like to do that by laying my block on there and putting the sentiment backwards and curving it and then flipping that block over. So now you can see that that curve matches the banner perfectly. So I've used the coordinating die to cut that banner out, and I'm putting some foam squares just along the bottom and the two sides because this is going to overlap the bottom of the window a little bit. So foam tape at the top of this banner would just stick through the window and then your card would not open. I'm also going to add that rainbow bunting I colored earlier. That's going to go across the top of this window. And then I can add my plants. I'm adding some with liquid glue, making sure that that glue is only on the side that's going to hit the frame. You don't want to put the glue on the side that's going to be over the window. And then I'm using some thin foam squares for the other plants. So these foam squares are half the thickness of the foam that I used for the banner. So they sit behind that banner really nicely. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, liquid glue on the plant that is in the background and some foam squares on the plant in the foreground. And I really like how these can overlap this window opening because that chair only takes up part of that frame. And then finally, that second mouse, you can see how that spins perfectly. All those things are out of the way. I was just double checking. But that second little mouse, I wanted him to peek out the corner. I originally wanted him on the left, but I actually decided to put him on the right so that maybe you could see a little bit of his hand that's waving, which I just think is so cute. So I'm just going to put some liquid glue just on the bottom part of him here. And then the easiest way sometimes for me to place these is to pick it up with my card. So I'm just going to lay my card over it and just push down and pick up that glue. And then I can make any little adjustments that I want. And here is basically the finished card with that little spinner there. So I've wound it up, but I've closed it, and then when I open it, that chair is just going to spin right around, which I just think is adorable. So here's another look at that card. I had so much fun making it. I think this might actually be my very first spinner card, but it was a lot of fun. Thanks so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye!